Next up, I want to briefly talk about nesting elements. So in the previous video, we saw EM and strong and B and I, and we nested those inside of other elements like an H1 or a paragraph, right? Here's the H1. All of that content is in the H1, but then within it, we have an emphasis and a second emphasis element. And then that whole H1 is nested in the body element. This is really, really common in HTML. We nest things all the time. And if you look at any web page, let's just go to the MDN homepage. If I inspect, right-click, inspect, it opens up the DevTools, and you can see how nested the content is. I can collapse things. So here's the body, right? Now we just have HTML, head, and body. Open up the body. There's something called a div. We're going to learn about a div. It's just a generic box. Inside, there's a whole bunch of stuff. All of this is in that div. And then let's look at the UL. There's an LI. But each LI itself actually contains something called an anchor element we're about to learn about. If we look at this div, there's more divs and paragraphs and anchor elements and spans. We're going to learn about this stuff. But my point here is just that we nest things all the time. It's pretty rare. It's not unheard of, but it's not that common just to have a document that looks like this, for example. You know, an H1 and then a paragraph and then another paragraph. And just sort of linear elements, not nested. Often we'll have anchor elements in there or emphasis elements in there or spans or lots of divs and things that we're going to cover soon. So that's all I wanted to say here. We nest stuff all the time. And in fact, we already saw it with ULs and LIs, right? You have to nest them. But more than that, we often will nest elements many levels deep. And we'll get some practice with that. Next up, we have two simple elements, superscript and subscript. So we use these to create superscript and subscript. If you're not familiar with those terms, superscript refers to text that is typically elevated off the baseline that has a smaller font. So exponents is a classic example, or the ordinal, I think this is called ordinal numbers, where you do first, second, third, fourth, fifth. The TH there is elevated off the baseline. You can use this for citations, right? If we look at Wikipedia, I'm sure, do I not have Wikipedia open? I thought I did. Okay, here we go. If we look around, I'm sure we can find all sorts of examples of superscript, like right there, and right there, right there. So lots of examples. We don't use it, though, just to make text smaller. There's many ways of doing that with CSS, but you should only use the sup elements, SUP, for superscript, when something is supposed to be superscript. So we'll do a very quick, simple example. I'll just do it in an H1. Get rid of what I had before. Today is my 17th birthday. It is not. It would be nice to be 17 again. So I can wrap the TH in a sup, S-U-P, for superscript. And go to my document, refresh the page, and you can see we get superscript. So very simple, right? Put whatever you want in there as long as it's actually supposed to be superscript. Don't use that just to make your text tiny. And then we have subscript, which is typically a text that's made smaller and then lowered, so below the typical baseline, right, as you see there. So things like chemical formulas is a classic example, right? H2O, where the 2 is down below, it's smaller. Again, don't use this just to make your text tiny, but only use it when something is supposed to be subscript. So I'll just do an H2O example. H2O is going to look like, actually that's a 0, look like that with an O. Right, and to make this 2 go in its proper place, it's supposed to be part of a chemical formula. I use sub, S-U-B, S-U-P is superscript, S-U-B is subscript, and now we get subscript for the 2. But that's all there is to those elements. One more thing I want to call your attention to if you're brand new to HTML is that there's a key difference between there's two types of elements, let's put it that way. Certain elements, like a paragraph, for example, if I put some text in there, let's just start with that. And then let's try working with an emphasis element that says chickens for no reason. Okay, let's do this. Refresh the page. This is what we see, right? So we have our emphasis element in our paragraph. But there's a very important difference. If I highlight this and I inspect, I'll open up my DevTools side by side. When I hover over this paragraph, you can see that there's a blue box there. Hopefully you can see that blue box on the left. It goes all the way across the whole container, the whole body in this case. And it doesn't actually matter how big my text is in there. So I could just have a single little word in there like lorem, refresh the page. When I highlight my paragraph, it goes all the way across the screen. Now, if I look at the EM element, it does not. It doesn't have this big box that extends all the way across. And this is because certain elements like a paragraph or a heading take up a full block by default. They just go all the way across. We can change all of that with CSS. And then other elements like spans, EM, superscript, subscript, they're known as inline elements. They don't take up a whole block. They just take up the little bit of space that's required for their content. So if this EM just had the word or the letter C, that is the width of that EM, just that little C right there, that blue box. Compared to the paragraph, it has the letter L. It's still going to extend all the way across. And why this matters is, let's say I restore this back to what I had. If I had another EM after this paragraph, right there, right? So chickens, and then lorem ipsum, and then chickens. If I refresh the page, the chickens is forced onto its own line because this paragraph takes up a whole block. Horizontally, it goes all the way across. It won't share the space with anything. But an EM will share the space. If I have two of them right next to each other like this, they play nice. They don't push each other onto separate lines like a paragraph does. So a paragraph kind of has a force field around it, pushing things below it. It takes up a whole horizontal block. We can change all of that with CSS. And other elements like an H1 do the same thing. Or let's do another H1 here. Heading. Even if it's very short, it still extends all the way across the screen. But EMs, spans, some of the other elements we're going to learn, all the strong, B, I, superscript, subscript, those are inline elements. They wrap around a piece of text and they won't push other content away. But things like headings and paragraphs, they do. So that's something to pay attention to as we learn new elements.